Howdy, and welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. Thanks for listening. Breakaway is a Bible study that meets on the campus of Texas A&M. For more information on Breakaway, please visit breakawayministries.org. We hope you enjoy the talk.
Well, this is a great time to be an Aggie football fan. And I went to the game 2 weeks ago when we played against Arkansas up in Arlington, and it was insane. The way we pulled that off in overtime, that was crazy. It was one of the most memorable football experiences I've ever had in my life, being over there. But I would say when I was there, equally as memorable as watching that game for me was a moment when I was walking out to my car when I passed by, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so young men, looked like students, that I think were both Arkansas and Aggie students that were being arrested because what it looked like had gone down is they had gotten in a fight in the parking lot. And I remember walking past one of them, and I made eye contact as I was walking past them. And as I looked in his eyes, I just thought for a second, I'm like, did you see this coming at all? Like when you were getting ready this morning, were you thinking, I'm going to go watch a sporting event, and I don't know, I might end up in jail tonight. Did you really think it would end with you handcuffed to a tree? Like this escalated quickly for you, right? And I thought about that, and you go, man, that's kind of crazy that something that was supposed to be a fun us versus them quickly turned into a really ugly us versus them, right, for these guys. And you go, well, why mention that? Well, it's not because I think most of you are going to end up in a fight in the parking lot tonight. I'm not really concerned about that for most of you. But here's the reality, is that we live in a culture where there is a lot of outrage. Where there is a lot of outrage among groups. It's interesting, I even just typed in the word outrage in the news, and like millions of hits came. Just a few headlines from the last couple days were outrage over U.S. airstrikes in Afghanistan. Middle school fight prompts outrage. Cosmo magazine's cover of the Kardashians draws outrage. An unsafe trailer load on the freeway sparks outrage. And you're like, that's pretty crazy about our culture that same word is like U.S. airstrikes and the Kardashians are all producing in us outrage. Right? But the news is grabbing that, and the news is going to keep churning out stories like that because they know there's a lot of energy produced when I can get one group of people to mock or be angry at another group of people. That there's power in an us versus them because we love that us versus them narrative. And it's getting amplified in our culture today, and particularly now that we're in an election cycle. And you see it all over the U.S. that it's coming, this sense of us versus them, Democrat versus Republican, pro-life versus pro-choice, conservative versus liberal, black versus white, LGBT versus evangelical, red state versus blue state, country music lovers versus people with taste, CrossFit people versus regular people. Are you outraged? I hear some outrage. And listen to me, in some of those groups, in some of these realities, look, there are some real issues. There's some real points of disagreement. There's some real issues that need to be discussed. But often the issues and resolutions get buried in the intensity of anger and name-calling. And the reality is we see that in our culture today. You see it online, the ease with which we can hate on someone or things like that. And we can look at that and go, you're right, Ben, look at our culture, shame on them. But look at us. How many times in your own social media experience have you mocked or put down some other group? Can you believe those people? They think that way. Can you believe someone? How can you be that stupid? That there's this culture in us that we want to shame other people, right? There's power in that, right? There's something satisfying in the human soul about looking down on somebody else. But the reality is when we give in to an us versus them culture, the ugliness escalates. It does. And so a dentist a couple months ago killed a lion named Cecil, right? And what happened? It started with mockery, people online making fun of this guy, right? And then it got bigger. Jimmy Kimmel's making fun of this dentist that went to Africa and killed a lion. It got viewed 6 million times. And you go, okay, everyone's making fun of this dentist. Let's nationally make fun of him. And I'm not defending him. But what I'm saying is the mockery turned into death threats against him and his family. And then in the midst of those death threats, even from organizations like PETA calling for him to be hanged, they started introducing into that environment his home address. And you go, that escalated really quickly. And so I disagree profoundly with what you're doing to, you should be killed, and anyone that's up for that, here's where he lives. I listened to a debate the other day on TV where a commentator was in a conversation about deficit reduction. And he said of the people on the other side of the argument, I wish they were all effing dead. About deficit reduction. And you go, there's something to that. And you go, you know what? When it's an us versus them culture, the ugliness escalates. And it's pervasive in America more than ever. And when you get that kind of thing, what happens is my group won't be satisfied until that group is annihilated. And maybe not physically for us, but you go, I want to verbally annihilate them. I want to socially ostracize that person. I disagree with them, so I'm going to marginalize them. I'm going to rally my friends and make fun of them. I'm going to contribute to that environment. And let me tell you something, that escalates around the world. There are other places in the world where it's not just I'm trying to annihilate you verbally or socially or financially. There's other places where it gets to a point where, say, my group will kill your group because you disagree with me. And the reality is we have a world that's heading this way, and I'm worried about it in our culture because of this outrage culture of the us's versus the them's pervading even your generation. And here's the reality. There has to be a better way. And there is a better way. Jesus shows us a better way. And for the people of Jesus, we have to take our cues for him. This is one of the reasons why we did this series this semester of Jesus and the Outsiders. I wanted to do this series about Jesus and the outsiders for two reasons. I wanted the people who feel like they're outside, far away from church, far away from God, far away from religious people. The vast majority of Aggies, many come here to Breakaway. Most Aggies don't. But I wanted people to do that, especially as we went outdoors to Simpson. I wanted them to hear the message that Jesus is for the outsider, for the marginalized, for the person who feels far away from God. Not only is he interested in you, you're why he came. That he wants you if you feel far away or disconnected or unclean or dirty. He's coming for you. But I did it also for the Christian. That we could see in Jesus, here's how to engage people we profoundly disagree with. That are on the other side of the aisle on social issues or political issues or in a different club or organization. How do we treat the other? And we're going to see Jesus put on a master class of it tonight. And I want to look at it together because he gives us an image of how the people of Jesus are to treat the other. It's a blueprint for us. And it's in Luke chapter 19. And in Luke chapter 19, Luke sets the stage in verse 1. Speaking of Jesus, as he entered Jericho and was passing through, Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, and he goes through the city Jericho. And in verse 2, he introduces a main character. It says, and behold, look out. There was a man named Zacchaeus, and he was a dentist who killed a lion named Cecil. No, that's not what it says. But he was at least as disliked as that guy. Because that combination of terms, that Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector and was rich. That combination of words guaranteed two things about him. He was well known and very disliked. Because a chief tax collector was a Jew who had secured the rights to tax his own people for the Roman government, who were oppressing his people, right? He had secured the rights to collect taxes from Rome, which was an occupying force. And so how does a tax collector become rich? You do it the way a lot of tax collectors did. You tack on a heavy surcharge so that when they pay the Roman government, they have to pay you, and you become rich. And so what you do is you take advantage of the helpless estate of your own people for your own financial benefit. So make no mistake, when we walk into this text, Jesus enters this city, and this guy, Zacchaeus, is not a sympathetic character. This guy has flown a big banner in his culture saying, I care more about me than any of you. And he made that real clear by abusing them for his own gain. Not a good guy. And for the culture of that day, their response, they can't stop him. But what they can do is try to hurt him emotionally, so they shun him, right? And yet then we find out something about this guy in verse 3. It says, and he was seeking to see who Jesus was. This man that's on the outside of religious circles, far away from people who are walking with Jesus, you see he has an interest in seeking who Jesus was. Why does he have an interest in Jesus? We have no idea. But he's heard about him. And he's heard something about Jesus that makes him interested in Jesus. What information made him interesting? We don't know, but we know at this point in Jesus' life, he was famous. And Jesus was famous for two things. One, for miraculous healings. And so maybe Zacchaeus just wanted to come to see the show. Or two, he was famous for preaching a message about a God who was willing to accept anybody who would admit their need. A God who was willing to take in everybody, anybody, no matter how far gone. A God of love and of grace. And I don't know which one of those got on board with him. I tend to think it's that latter one, that when someone with power is willing to associate with the poor, that's attractive. And so he comes after Jesus. And I just want to say, even though we're not sure why he's seeking, let me say this about him. You don't seek if you feel satisfied. If you're satisfied, you don't seek. You don't seek out food if you're full. Seeking assumes lacking. And so here what we know about Zacchaeus is he's got money and he's got power, but he does not feel satisfied. It's not enough, and it never is. And so your first point for the Christian in the room, the follower of Jesus Christ, can I tell you something? When you interact with the other, avoid making assumptions about what's going on in their life. Avoid assumptions about what's going on inside of somebody, because you don't know. Lady Gaga has 51 million followers on Twitter. And I went on her Twitter page, and her home picture just has the statement on it. Sometimes I hate myself. And you look at that and you go, someone with money, fame, and power, you don't expect to read a statement like that. Therefore, everyone to see this cry of help. When I look in the mirror, I don't like what I see. That may surprise you, but it happens. There can be a sense of emptiness even in the midst of abundance. And so when you see someone who's on the other side of whatever divide you're on, you need to know, I really don't know what's going on inside that person. So let me address something that's going on in here. This semester, I've heard a lot of criticisms from some people in this room about other people in this room. And the criticisms go something like this. I've seen them online or heard them from people. They go something like this. You see a guy who's drunk at Northgate, and then you see him here at Breakaway. And you go, what a hypocrite. What a fake. What a liar. This whole thing's a fake, right? He's acting like he's religious here, but then look at his Instagram feed, man. It tells a different story. And you go, what a total hypocrite. And let me say something. He might be. There's probably some of those in here tonight that they're just totally playing games, and it doesn't really work well. That's a possible scenario. But let me tell you something else. That guy that was drunk on Thursday and here on Tuesday, he might have been drunk because he's experimenting, trying to find some kind of happiness out there in the world. Maybe he's doing what a lot of people I know do, and that is they medicate and they use substances to comfort themselves because they can't handle being themselves, right? And maybe he's using the party lifestyle to try to mask some trauma and some pain in his life, but he's turned up here because what he's doing on Thursday isn't working, and so he's here because he's seeking, because he knows that he's lacking. Do you really want to fold your arms and condemn that guy? Or on the flip side, some other people go, well, I know those religious people. Those religious people are all judgmental. That's why I don't go to Breakaway. That's why I don't go to places like that. It's because on the flip side, you got all those judgmental Christian people that they're just judging all of us and judge. That's all their Twitter feed is not judgment number 4 is this. And they're just judging all the time. And you condemn them for being condemning. Look how they condemn people. I condemn thee, right? And we do that. And yet you don't know. That person who is a legalist, they could be just a total hypocrite and just a total jerk face, and they need to repent tonight. That is a possible scenario. Or maybe they grew up with a lot of anxiety and fear in their home. And so the way they've put control into a crazy life is by trying to clutch on to what's familiar and their little rules, because they don't know the comfort of being loved by God that makes you secure enough to love other people who are even different from you. And so they cling to some rules and boundaries, and when you're outside of them, you make them nervous. And they need to grow, and they need to learn, and they need to be here. And so the truth is, we don't know what's going on inside of a lot of our hearts. Don't assume. Avoid assumptions. Zacchaeus, not a good dude, selfish dude, easy to condemn, but he comes because he's seeking, because he knows he's lacking. But he's got a problem in verse 3. It says he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was small in stature. He really had two problems. Large crowd, small guy. That's the problem, right? Now, we tall people don't know what this is like. But I hear from short people that's a real problem. I'm just kidding. I know some of you can't tell because you're looking at me on the screen, but I remember the first time I did a chapel for the football team, one of the guys came up to me and he was like, "I got to be real, man. I thought you were a lot bigger." And I was like, yeah. I always thought I was normal height until I was at a wedding in college. And I remember standing around with a group of buddies and some guy told a short joke. And we were all like, ah, and he was like, yeah, sorry, Ben. And I was like, yeah, what? What do you mean, sorry, Ben? What do you... And then I looked at pictures later from the wedding. We all had our arms around each other's shoulders, and I looked like I was riding a chopper, like ape hangers. And I'm like, man, dang it. So he's trying to see Jesus, but there's a crowd and he can't see him. And so one of the upsides of being small is it makes you resourceful, right? And so in verse 4, it says he ran ahead and climbed into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. So he decides, I got to secure a better vantage point. So he sees where this parade that's following Jesus is going, and he runs up to a sycamore tree. Sycamore tree because they have low, flat branches, so a little guy can grab it and get up there, right? And so he does it. And let me tell you something. He gets in that tree. Why? Because he's savvy, because he's smart. I'm going to get to a place where I can see. But I think he also does it because there's a lot of humility in that. To get up in that tree is to make a statement of vulnerability. Of I'm going to risk being made fun of. I'm going to risk being rejected. I'm the guy everybody knows and everybody doesn't like. And I'm going to scamper up a tree because I know I need some answers I don't have. And there's something noble about that. As much of a mess as he is, there's a humility and there's a vulnerability there, right? That he opens himself up to ridicule. What's he doing here? What's that guy coming out here for? Or to go back to his buddies and them say, you went out to see Jesus? Why? And let me just acknowledge, some of you are there. That it takes some courage to show up in a place like this. That you have some buddies that are going to say to you, you went to Breakaway? Why? Dude, are you getting all religious on us? What's going on with that? And there's a humility that was required to come here. And I commend you for that. Pride is what will keep you away from spiritual awakening. It is. And Jesus is the hardest, not on religious people. People say that all the time. Oh, he came after religious people. No, Jesus came after proud people. Because proud hearts are far from the heart of God. But when you're humble, you're vulnerable, you're seeking, he commends that. And some of you are like that tonight. Some of you are as far away from me as you can get up in the balcony, because that's you. Some of you just got here late, and that's fine. But when I came to Breakaway as a student, I would hide out in the balcony sometimes. I just had a lot to process, and there was a vulnerability to show up with need. And Zacchaeus gets up in that tree because he knows I don't have answers. And there's something good about that. And then something crazy happens. Because here's the thing, Zacchaeus isn't trying to become an insider. He's not a disciple. He's not trying to push through the crowd to get to Jesus. He's not trying to have a conversation with Jesus. He's not trying to get in the VIP lounge with Jesus. He's saying, I'm just trying to see him from back here in a tree, man. And then Jesus does something crazy. In verse 5, it says, and Jesus came to that place. The procession goes up to the tree, and he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. It doesn't just snake by Zacchaeus. Jesus doesn't just look up at that tree and kind of nod at him and keep going. Jesus walks up to the tree, stops the procession, looks up at the guy with everybody else and says his name, Zacchaeus. How does he know his name? We don't know. Could be miraculous. He was pulling stuff like that all the time with people, messing with their minds. He just knew things. It could have been that. It could have been that he asked somebody, who's that dude up in the tree, man, right? It could have been that he had just heard about him. But however that shook down, however he learned about it, there's something profound about the fact that he did say his name, because Jesus is making a statement. I know who you are. I'm aware of who you are. I know what you are. I know what you've been in this community. I know you're not part of the disciples. I know you're not part of the people that are in the in crowd of seeking me. I know the decisions you've made in life. I know what you've done and what it's cost you. I know who you are, Zacchaeus. And I am walking up to you. I am coming to you anyway. And not just coming to you anyway, I am coming to you purposefully. You are why I'm here. And I love that it's immediate. He says, hurry up and come down. He doesn't say, hey, we should grab coffee sometime. He says, you're here seeking me. I know who you are. Get down here. We're going to your house. I want to connect to you. And I want to commend some of you. There's some Zacchaeuses in here tonight that you came out of some vulnerability of wanting to learn, and you finally said yes to that friend who brought you. And I want to tell you something. Jesus is seeking you tonight. He knows you. He knows what you've done. He knows who you are. He knows all the shiny moments and all the not so shiny ones. And he's coming for you tonight. And he's saying, hurry up. Let's not wait. There's no maybe. He's saying, I want you to respond to me tonight. You're not just a spectator in this place. I am here for you because I must stay at your house today. He uses a word of divine necessity. I must be at your house, Zacchaeus. Why Zacchaeus' house? Plenty of other religious people's houses. He walks up to the most hated guy in town and says, I have to stay at your house. It's not even I want to. I have to. Why? Because you are why I've come. And that's the next point, is the initiation with the outsider. What do the people of Jesus do? We avoid making assumptions about what's going on in the hearts of the people in our dorms and suites and on this campus. We don't make assumptions on what's going on inside of you. I don't know. But what I do know is that I'm going to initiate conversation with you. Zacchaeus was on the periphery. Jesus comes to him and initiates with him. I want you. And the people of Jesus initiate with those who are far off. And what I love is Jesus doesn't lead with a sermon on hell. He leads with an invitation to a meal. And I just want to challenge you, Christian, do you do that? Have you ever done that? For those of you who said, I'm a believer in Christ, have you ever invited someone into your home and said, hey, I want to know you. I want you to be a part of my life. And you go, sure, I invite my friends over all the time. Well, Jesus said in an earlier sermon, he was like, everybody does that. It's not like really noble to go, I invited my friends over. Go ahead and bask in the awe of my benevolence. You ever ask somebody over that's not your friend because you love them because God does? I remember I had a spiritual teacher when I was in college that he came to Christ. He was in a fraternity, and it was a crazy fraternity and over at UT. And he said, I came to Christ, and he said, I stopped drinking. He said, I was an alcoholic. And he said, and I just had to cut it out. There was no midway point for me. He said, so I would go to the parties, and I would carry around orange juice. So everybody knew, I'm not drinking. I'm drinking orange juice. And he said, so I'd walk around the parties and visit with everybody, but I wanted them to know I'm doing something else. I'm drinking orange juice. And he said, I was there one night, and I'm there at the end, and everybody's cleaning up. And he's like, one of the biggest guys in the fraternity walked up to me and was like, hey, man, you want a beer? And he said, I looked at him like, no, dude, you know I don't want a beer. You do that all the time. You know I don't want one. And he said, then the guy grabbed me and put me into the wall. And he said, I know you don't want a beer. He says, what I want to know is why you've never asked me if I want some orange juice. And what struck him about that is kind of funny. But hear what the guy was saying. I know who you are, Christian, because you don't do what I do. But you don't invite me to do what you do. That was the implication. That was the piercing of this man's heart, of saying, they know what I'm against, but do they know that I'm inviting them in? Notice he doesn't invite him to the synagogue. It wouldn't have been bad to do. He doesn't invite him to church. They go to a house. And some of you have people in your dorms and your suites that you could invite them to Breakaway, and I hope you do. But they are, whatever reason, not interested in coming, but you can invite them to lunch. We had a student in our ministry that was a hard partying kid. I mean, he developed a reputation. They called him the captain because he was literally the life of the party. And they lived in a party house next to these sweet, adorable Christian girls in their house. And the sweet, adorable Christian girls invited these crazy, hard partying dudes over for dinner. And these guys showed up, and there was all kinds of adorable Christian knickknacks on the walls. And he said, I remember walking out of that house, and he said, my roommate looked at me and he goes, dude, they're trying to convert us, man. And he said, and I told them, they're nice. And he said, they were always nice to us. And then on my birthday, they bought me a Bible, and no one had ever done anything like that. And it was the kindness of these girls that led him to repentance, because that's how it works, right? So Jesus doesn't come pounding in with a sermon. He comes in with an invitation. And look in verse 6, it says, so he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. My house? You want to come to my house? Nobody wants to come to my house. None of these people even talk to me. And you're serious right now. Yeah, I'm serious. I want to come to your house. I want you. That's the heart of Jesus. That's meant to be the heart of the people of Jesus. And there are people out there that would gladly respond if we initiated with them. How can we do it? Why would we do it? I think it's because we understand something that the crowd doesn't. In verse 7, it says, when they saw it, they all grumbled. He's gone in to be the guest of a man who's a sinner. It says they all started grumbling. They're all like, are you kidding me? All these good people, he could have stayed after you go to that house? And it betrays an assumption in them that is far from the heart of God. And what's that? That I'm worthy of the presence of Jesus. That is not the gospel. The good news, the gospel of Jesus, is none of us are worthy. The people who Jesus moves toward are those who will admit they're in need. And he sees Zacchaeus' vulnerability and says, that's the house I'm going to. Why? Is he a sinner? Yes, he's a sinner. But Jesus understands what we're meant to understand. And this is our third point, that love precedes life change. It's love that precedes life change. That's how it happens. The gospel isn't, well, clean yourself up and then Jesus will come to you. No, the gospel is while we were enemies, Christ died for us. While we were lost, he sought us. That's the message of God. Of yes, you're a sinner. A sinner doesn't make you ineligible to my grace. It makes you the ideal candidate. Because I know that when I come to your house, it's love that precedes life change. We all know this. You saw Beauty and the Beast as a kid. How does the beast become attractive? You got to love a beast to make them attractive and make them lovable, right? We're zooming into now, Frozen. How do you keep someone from being a destructive force in the community? By driving a sword into their skull or by sacrificing your life for theirs? It's love that thaws the frozen heart, right? They just got it from Jesus. And so Jesus comes to this guy's house and says, I know you're a mess. I'm aware of that. And I'm moving towards you knowing that. And love precedes life change. And when this guy understands that he's loved by God, it does change him. In verse 8, it says, Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, behold, half my goods I give to the poor. It was considered generous in that culture to give away 20% of your income. He says 50% is going out the door right now. I was once a taker. Now I'm a giver. I was once just in it to do me. Now I'm in it to take care of whoever has a need. That's the power of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he says, and if I have defrauded anyone, and that if assumes it's true, the way it's constructed in the original language. Anyway, he says, if I defrauded anyone, and I know I have, I restore it fourfold, which was the strongest in the law of the Old Testament thing you could do, is say, I'm going to pay back 4 times what I took from them. And Jesus looks and says, today salvation has come to this house since he's a son of Abraham. Does salvation come because the guy did this stuff? No, that stuff is a mark that salvation has come, because Jesus says, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. It's the Son of Man who is seeking, and it's the Son of Man who's saving. That when Jesus in love moves towards us, when the people of Jesus move towards others with a gospel of a God who loves us while we were a long way off, when that gospel comes, God seeks us, Jesus saves us, and it's love that precedes life change. And life change comes when we embrace his love. It does. And the Son of Man sought this lost man and saved this lost man. And when Jesus gets a hold of you, the love of Jesus transforms. That's the business Jesus is into. And that's the business we're meant to be into. That I know I can help make a difference in the lives of these people. Why? Because the Son of God I serve saves people. His love changes people. So I know that the Son does the saving, and I'm with him. And so I go out in confidence into a broken world, not seeing potential objects of my wrath, but potential recipients of his grace. Can you do that? Can you look out at the world, at the people you profoundly disagree with their lifestyle? That you look at them and say, everything you do is abhorrent to me morally. I completely disagree with you philosophically. I can't believe you're saying these things right now. I can't believe you did those things. But to say, with the person I profoundly disagree with, can I make them more than just an object of my wrath? Can I believe they might be a potential recipient of God's grace? That's how Jesus sees the world. That's how the people of Jesus are meant to see the world. Kirsten Powers was an atheist and an agnostic in college. She said, I wavered between atheism and agnosticism, never coming close to considering that God could be real. After college, I worked in the Clinton administration. And it was while in the Democratic politics that she notes, my world became aggressively secular. Everyone I knew was politically left-leaning, and my group of friends was overwhelmingly atheist. To the extent I encountered Christians, it was in the news cycle. And inevitably, they were saying something about gay people or feminists, and I did not feel I was missing much. Then she started dating a guy. And as they were getting to know each other, he asked her, do you believe that Jesus is your Savior? And she writes, my stomach sank. She said, I started to panic. She said, my first thought was, he's crazy. And she told him, I need to be upfront with you. I will never believe in Jesus. And she says, then he said the magic words for a liberal. Do you think you could keep an open mind about it? And she said, well, of course I'm very open-minded. She said, but I wasn't. I derided Christians as anti-intellectual bigots who were too weak to face the reality that there's no rhyme or reason to the world. I had found this man's church attendance as an oddity, not a point in his favor. But as I talked with him, I grew conflicted. On the one hand, I was totally creeped out. But on the other hand, I had respect for him. A smart, educated, intellectual man. And she said, what if what he believes is true and I'm not even willing to consider it? So she went to church, was totally freaked out by the music. But she began to hear the sermons, and she began to read the Bible. And she concluded at one point, there wasn't really a strong case for her atheism. She said, I began to believe the evidence lay on the side of Christianity, but I didn't want it. And so one night I went on a trip to Taiwan. And I woke up in what felt like a strange cross between a dream and reality. And Jesus came to me and said, here I am. And she said, it felt so real. I thought people who talked about hearing from God were delusional or lying. And she said, but here I was. I didn't know what to make of it. I called my boyfriend. He told me he'd been praying for me the night before and felt we were supposed to break up. So we did. And she said, honestly, I was upset, but more about being traumatized about the person of Jesus than the breakup. I tried to write off my experience as the misfiring of synapses, but I couldn't shake it. And she says, when I returned to New York a few days later, I was lost. I suddenly felt God everywhere, and it was terrifying. It was unwelcome. It felt like an invasion. But then she asked a friend's advice, and he said, you need to join a Bible study, which she thought, oh God, only weirdos and zealots go to Bible studies. But she walked in that door and she said, I don't remember everything they said, but I know when I left, everything changed. I'll never forget standing outside that apartment on the Upper East Side and saying to myself, it's true. It's completely true. The world looked entirely different, like a veil had been lifted off. I had not an iota of doubt, and I was filled with an indescribable joy. That's someone who liked to deride Christians as bigots, zealots, thought it was simplistic, fake, found someone with the kindness enough to initiate with her, invite her in. And someone who was an antagonist to Jesus is now a faithful follower of Jesus. Why? Because someone was willing to initiate conversation, knowing that it's love that's going to precede life change, and that Jesus will do the saving, and he is in the business of taking conservatives and making them compassionate, taking liberals and making them holy, taking thieves and making them generous, taking prostitutes and making them pure, taking lost people and making them found. He makes the merciless into the merciful, the abandoned to the adopted. He turns the judgmental kind and the dirty holy. Jesus changes people. And so as the people of Jesus, we walk out in confidence into this world, saying we may disagree, but I can do it with civility because you're not an object of my wrath. You're a potential recipient of his grace. And so I will come to you with it for his glory and your good.
Well, howdy, and welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. My name is Hannah, and I'm sitting here with Ben Stewart after a breakaway on Tuesday. We were back in Reed Arena, and it was an amazing night. It was great. We had a ton of announcements to start off with in a short night because we had silver taps, but we officially launched our live stream online last night, which was incredible.
Yes, and we thought, especially you guys would want to know that now on Tuesday nights at 9 o'clock Central Time for us is Breakaway is live. So you can go on our website and click on that because we've had people throughout the years say, Ben, we love listening to the talks, the podcast, but we'd love to hear the worship. And we can't put the worship on podcast because of licensing stuff or whatever, but on a live stream you can. So yeah, absolutely, we still want you to download podcasts, but if you want to participate in the event live, maybe you have a small group of people that you go, we want to watch it together or whatever. Tuesday nights now, they'll be rolling live, and it'll be the worship and the talk the whole night, so you can get a sense of the whole feel with the students right there, which I think will be pretty amazing.
Yeah. So now all of you following us online, join us on a Tuesday. You can join us live.
Join us live.
That's right. In the next couple of weeks, we have some exciting guest worship leaders coming in. We've got Austin Stone's Jimmy McNeil next Tuesday on the 13th. And then the week after that, we have All Sons and Daughters coming on the 20th, which we're really excited about.
Yes. And again, we can't put those on podcasts, but if you live stream,
that's right.
Jimmy is going to be here. It's amazing. And then All Sons and Daughters, of course, they're incredible too. So they're going to be two pretty special nights, man.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. And speaking of music, we were not here last week on the podcast because we were releasing a worship album. And so that's why we're not here with you guys. But that is set to come out in December.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So we recorded it live last week. Mm-hmm. And I'll just tell you now, the energy was amazing in there. There's songs that were written by Jeff, or some songs that were written by someone else, but Jeff did a unique arrangement. So they are kind of, they're songs that really, truly are rising up out of our community of students. And we felt that for a while of this is really special and we want to share it. And we finally got a chance to to do it, man. So we got it
Yeah.
recorded. Now it's just all the mixing and mastering, and we're just thrilled to announce it now that December 1st, you can get it. The worship of Breakaway is coming, and we can't wait for it to get
Yeah.
out as far and wide as it can to help people. We told students that night, this isn't just to do a CD because we said we can. It's that our voices together could proclaim truth into people's lives, that someone in their car halfway around the world could listen to this and sing along with us and know that they're not alone as they sing these truths about God and these hopes for their life. So we're pretty fired up about it and can't wait for it to come out December 1st.
Yeah. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Well, and many of you are aware, but the reason why we do this back end of the podcast is because there's limited time, obviously, on Tuesday. And sometimes, Ben, you have more to say than you got to say. And so, especially with a short night with Silver Taps, did you have any more thoughts that you wanted to add to last night's message?
Yes. I had 3 things I want to say, and I'll try to say them quickly. The first of which relates to, one of the big points we were making is that love precedes life change, and often love produces life change. God's love does. It's his love that transforms us. And for us as the people of God, of Jesus, we need to share his love with other people, knowing that that's what's going to change their life, And but with that, I wanted to make some clarifications, because some people may hear that and go, that's why I have to date that non-Christian boys to save them. Or some guys like, that's why I should date this hot girl. It's not a Christian. It's maybe I can date her to Jesus. And I just want to make clear that the dating a non-Christian to make them a Christian, evangelating thing is, I do not believe, the best method. Namely because the transformative love of God in someone's life is the grace love, the undeserved, unobligated, free grace love of Jesus coming to somebody. Romantic love has within it a need love of, I personally want something back from you. I want a reciprocal thing where you give me attention and affection. And so it becomes about us. But I think the power of Christian love, when you're trying to share it with someone who's not a Christian, is it's not love that's looking for you to give something back to me. It's love that's free. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I think when someone's saying, I want to date you and I want you to love me and I want you to know Jesus, it gets confusing in there. Right. Because I'm not saying God hasn't used that in the past or can't, but I'm saying that is not the best method. And I think the Bible's pretty clear about believers not being yoked together with unbelievers. If you're pursuing Christ and someone else isn't, then your life is going different directions. Right. And so as you intersect with them, goal number 1 is not how do I get them to love me? Goal number 1 is how do I bring friendships around them that can help them know the love of God for them. That is of utmost importance. And so for me, when I was in college, and even now, I didn't spend a lot of time trying to evangelize people of the opposite sex. I certainly would talk to non-Christian girls and have a relationship with them, but when it really came down to like deep soul issues, I would try to get them around Christian girlfriends of mine, because then you could have those deep conversations about their soul and it not confuse them. And I've seen a lot of people do that, where it's like, this person is really like wanting to save me and I think they love me, and like it gets really weird. And so I would just say that's an area with a lot of pitfalls. And we're going to talk more about that kind of stuff in the spring, but I just want to throw that out there. Yeah. And then 2, along with that too, I would say some people hear a talk like this and they go, that's why I need to be out at the bar every night with all my lost friends, is because someone's got to be out there with them. And I want to say the idea of the solo Christian parachuting in to the lost context is really not the best model either. Mm-hmm. And Jesus himself didn't follow that model. Like, Jesus rolled with a crew, like he did, And I think we're meant to. And when he sent his disciples out, it was 2 by 2. That our most effective ministry often with people is not us diving solo into their lives, but them seeing Christian community. It's been fascinating for us with our students to see. I tell them all the time, they go, hey man, I've got a dorm mate or suite mate that I keep inviting him to Breakaway and he just doesn't want to go. And I go, well, stop inviting him. It's like, invite him to go bowling with your Christian friends or whatever you do. And let them see that people who love Jesus are normal and fun.
Yeah.
I said, and that's where to start. And I found that often if you can try to intersect someone who doesn't know Christ with a community of people who know Christ, that's where they get to see the love of Christ most clearly. That doesn't mean you won't find yourself in situations where you are the only Christian in the context. That's great. But if you make your evangelistic strategy, me alone, running out into dark and difficult places, often that's not the most effective means. Mm-hmm. It's better when you can do it with a community.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I was going to say about that is just, there was a story I wanted to share and we can close on it. I just didn't have the time to, but I just think when you see a Christian people do that, of saying, I'm going to be somebody who shares the love of God with someone else, the world today really does, it's sad to say, they're surprised by it. I think for much of the world, they see Christianity as moralism. And so they see it as sort of high and mighty and judgmental. And for many of us in the Christian community go, that's not it at all, but that's the perception by many. And I was so moved by a letter I read. It was an open letter to the LGBT community written by Melissa Etheridge, who is part of that community and an outspoken one as a singer, songwriter, musician. She wrote an open letter. It was several years ago, but it was when President Obama first was elected. She found out that Rick Warren, the pastor of Saddleback Church, had been invited to pray at his inauguration. And she wrote in this letter that it felt like a slap in the face for the man we helped get elected, seemingly invited a gay hater to address the world at his inauguration. So that's how she felt. She was like, I was offended, a slap in the face to hear a gay-hating pastor had been invited to be the person giving a prayer at the inauguration. But then this is what she wrote, this open letter to her community. She said, I hadn't heard of Pastor Rick Warren before all of this. When I heard the news, it was a neat little soundbite form that we're so accustomed to, and it painted the picture for me. This Pastor Rick must surely be one hate-spouting, money-grabbing, bad-haired televangelist like all the others. One more hater working up his congregation to hate the gays, comparing us to pedophiles and those who commit incest, blah, blah, blah. Same old thing. And then she wrote, would I boycott the inauguration? Would I be marching again, like marching against it? But then she goes on to explain in the letter that she'd agreed to play at an event for world peace. And then she found out the speaker at the event would be none other than Pastor Rick Warren. And so she said, I was stunned. She says, my fight or flight instinct took over. Should I cancel? And she said, then a calm voice inside me said, well, are you really about peace or not? And so she decided, before we get on stage together, I should probably talk to this Rick Warren character. And so they got each other's phone numbers and whatever. And she writes this, I'm going to quote her. She says, on the day of the conference, I received a call from Pastor Rick. And before I could say anything, he told me what a fan he was. He had most of my albums from the very first one. What? This didn't sound like a gay hater, much less like a preacher. And she goes on, he invited me to his church, and I invited him to my home to meet my wife and kids. He told me of his wife's struggle with breast cancer just a year before mine. And when we met later that night, he entered the room with open arms and an open heart, and we agreed to build bridges in the future. And then this was, a letter, an open letter to the gay community, and she ended it this way. Brothers and sisters, the choice is ours now. Maybe instead of marching on his church, we can show up en masse and volunteer for one of the many organizations affiliated with his church that works for HIV and AIDS causes all around the world. And she goes on to talk about that, but her point was, I fully expected this Christian person to hate me. And she was stunned that the first thing that came out was not condemnation, but love.
Yeah.
And that love did not mean compromise or endorsement, but it meant you have dignity as a person, and you're going to know that I feel that way. And it is challenging her. okay, now, and she told her community that we have to decide, how do we interact with Pastor Rick Warren, whose church, you know, doesn't affirm a homosexual lifestyle. And yet she says, when I meet him, he's not hating me. He's not angry. Normally in the media, those two communities, when they come together, it explodes into outrage. And she said, but he was nice to me. And at the end, you hear her grappling with, we don't agree, but maybe we could find the areas we do, and we could find a way to have civil conversation. And I'm just proud of both of them in that, of going, yeah, you can disagree and should disagree, but can we do it in a way that maintains civility and says, I'm going to value you as a human being, even as we disagree on some key issues. And I love that about Rick Warren. I think he does a beautiful job of that, of speaking the truth in love and caring about people and entering areas where there's animosity and coming with the grace of Jesus Christ. That's what Jesus did with Zacchaeus. I'm going to come into a conversation that should be judgmental and harsh, but I'm going to come with an invitation to relationship. And I think that's beautiful. And I think when we do it, it's Christ-like. And what a difference we could make in the tone of so many conversations if we entered in with open arms to people. And that's my hope.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
That's it.
Awesome. Well, we will be back in Reed Arena next week with Jimmy McNeil worship leading, and we'll see you then.
See ya.